Hey, y'all. So we are looking at a significant lecture here that is really going to cover the height and the beginning of the decline of Spain. We're going to look at Philip II. We're going to identify militant Catholicism. And when we're looking at this, I want you to be thinking about in the wars of religion, how is Philip II weakening Spain? So be thinking about that as we kind of go through this lecture. Let's go ahead and jump through it. All right. So the first thing we see, Philip II. Who was Philip II? Well, his great grandparents were Ferdinand and Isabel. If we connect, we should be thinking about the Spanish Inquisition, Reconquista, the Crusader spirit. That's really going to be all part of his DNA. That is the worldview he sees. His dad is Charles V of HRA or Charles I of Spain. When Charles V finalizes the Peace of Augsburg in 1555, he's exhausted and he abdicates. As he abdicates or quits, he divides his empire. He gives Austria and the Holy Roman Empire to his brother Ferdinand, while giving Spain and some of those other lands to his son. So now we're going to have the Austrian Habsburgs and the Spanish Habsburgs. Which one's Philip part of? Yes, Spanish Habsburgs. So when we look at this, what lands does he control? Well, I love this map. We see he's going to control Spain. We see Italy. We see northern Italy. We see parts of the HRE. We see the Low Countries. The Low Countries are right here. The Low Countries, when we think about the Low Countries, that's going to be the Dutch, that we're going to talk about in a hot second. Really important. So that's what we're looking at. Plus, he also controls pretty much all of pretty much the whole world, right? And we know he also, 1640-ish, he marries his niece, which I'm going to go ahead and throw up in my mouth a little bit there. That's gross, but he marries his niece and the Portuguese queen, and he absorbs that. So we just see that he's a really powerful man. So now we're going to shift. So I'm going to tell you that militant Catholicism really means that Philip is going to be the most dogmatic king. He is the opposite of a politic. Think about how Henry IV attempted to compromise between the Huguenots and Catholics. Philip, there is no compromise. And he really thinks he is born to believe that he was chosen by God to reunite Christendom. That crusader spirit of his great grandparents and his father, he feels that he alone is doing it, and God chose him. That's really going to be a very powerful part of his paradigm as he's thinking about what that looks like, right? He's thinking about, I'm chosen by God. How does that, what does that even mean, right? Well, in 1571, that chosen by God paradigm is reaffirmed when Philip is the first European king to have a significant victory against the Ottoman Empire. It's called the Battle of Lepanto. It's a major victory of the Ottoman Empire, or the quote unquote evil Turks. It reaffirms that God complex, the idea that God chose. I love this painting here. This painting is about the Battle of Lepanto. Here's the earthly battle, and up here is where the battle was fought according to the Spanish. Yes, it's fought here, but it's also fought up there between the great saints versus Satan, basically. So again, there's a lot of things here. And because of that, because he's now confirmed, he thinks he's confirmed to be God's chosen, that he alone is responsible. Well, his administration or his government is going to be solely his responsibility. All of the decisions will be him. Go back to when we talked about the age of discovery, and we looked at the idea that, quote, if death come by way of Madrid, I shall live forever. Well, what we're going to find out is what that meant is, I'm going to restate it. It's because decisions were so slow to be made, because only one person, things weren't decided. And with that, there's no delegation. When we look at Philip, with this paradigm, he's called the prudent king. Put those quotations. That's his nickname. As a historian, I like nicknames. If I can understand why he's that nickname, it really helps out. But prudent means cautious. And look what he says here. because he believed himself to be God chosen, he was cautious in making every decision. And if he's making it, he's not going to delegate. So he's going to be responsible for all of the social, political, economic, religious, all those things. He alone is going to make all the decisions. That's a really weird thing because there's so many different things and there's so many different experts, but he feels like he is ordained by God. Remember that death come by, Ellis Curry? We talked about that just a second ago. This is the example I really want to point out. All right. This is not in your textbook, but here, economics. He is fighting so many wars. It's against the Turks, as you know. He's fighting the Dutch. He's going to eventually fight the. He's going to fight the. He's going to end up fighting the Dutch, the English. So he is in desperate need for money. So what happens is to raise the money, he's like, wait a minute. We have one really great value where our wool exports are being bought by the English and they're setting records on exporting these. So he's like, hey, I got an idea. I'm going to tax wool exports. Exports. Is that what he's supposed to do? What philosophy does that oppose? Think about it. Of course it goes against mercantilism. According to mercantilism, you're supposed to use tariffs against imports. You want to develop a favorable balance of trade. What's happening here? He's actually hurting himself. And the response is England begins to raise their own sheep. They don't want to pay the higher prices. And that drives what we called earlier the enclosure movement. So England is actually going to benefit from this economic policy. And do you think if Philip asked a mercantile expert and said, hey, what should I do? Would that mercantile expert say, let's tax our exports? Of course not. But why does he not ask the experts? Because he alone's chosen. And here we see now with this God complex, with this idea that he alone knows everything, we're going to now wander into the Netherlands. Philip, just like his father, is going to use Catholicism to centralize his empire. The Dutch in the Low Countries, we call the Netherlands. The reason we call them the Low Countries, they're literally below sea level. We'll talk about that later. But we know the Dutch were Calvinists. They were merchants, the Dutch East India Company, the Bank of Amsterdam, the Amsterdam Bourse. Think about how wealthy they are. But they're Calvinist. So Philip's like, wait a minute. We're not excited about that. So Philip created an exorbitant tax on the Dutch merchants to pay for the Inquisition. So he's transporting the Inquisition to punish the Dutch. And how's he paying it? The Dutch merchants. Do you think the Dutch merchants are excited about this? Of course not. And that sparks a rebellion. William the Silent, or William of Nassau, he becomes this leader of the Dutch republics. William the Silent is going to be really important. We're going to see Williams throughout pretty much every king that we will see from the Netherlands is going to be named William in his honor. The only queen that I know of is Wilhelmina, which is based on William. So William's going to create this dynasty, and he becomes that idea that. And what happens here? So now it's Philip versus William. They're having a violent fight. Well, it happens in a way that the southern Netherlands, the Flemish, even though they're Catholic, they began to fear the political policies of Philip II. So they do something that shocks Philip. What happens here with the pacification of Ghent is an agreement between all 17 Low Countries, and they're going to unite under William the Silent's leadership. Think about that. Why is that shocking Philip? Think about it. He's shocked because the Catholics are turning against him. But the Catholic God has chosen him. He is so confused by this that he refuses to react. So this is a crazy moment for him, and he's going to pause. He's going to be like, what is going on? What happens? Elizabeth I, the Queen of England, begins to support the Dutch rebellion. She finances the sea beggars that you read about. She sends her sea dogs, which are the British version, the pirates, if you will. And all of a sudden, Elizabeth is getting involved in this kind of a balance of power war, joining forces with the Dutch in hopes to weaken the Spanish. So all of a sudden, Philip felt overwhelmed, and he works to end the pacification. He wants to divide them. So what he does, he works with a union of Arras. He strikes a deal. The Flemish and he agree that the Low Countries, the southern Low Countries, will remain Spanish control. They will be Catholic. And Philip's saying, all right, and I'll leave you alone. You're going to be the Spanish Netherlands. You do what you do as long as you're Catholic and you support me. Then he turned on the Dutch and said, all right, you and I, we got to have a truce. I'm tired of fighting you. And the Union of Utrecht forms. And these are the Dutch agree that this context is going to slip into something called the 30 Years' War we're going to see later. But I just want to point out that it is this moment in which the Dutch, the Union of Utrecht will be primarily Calvinist, and the Dutch now are signing and becoming more independent. So what happens is, as the Netherlands unite, they force Philip into a position of weakness. He negotiates. He gives in to both the Flemish and the Dutch. And now he wants to call time out with them, and he wants to focus on his real enemy. And his real enemy is Elizabeth. He blames Elizabeth for everything. Remember, Philip was married to Mary. He was actually one time considered the King of England. When Mary dies, her half-sister Elizabeth becomes queen, and it is damaging. And what we're going to see, he's angry with Elizabeth over her policies with the Dutch and Protestantism, and he organizes an invasion of England. This is 1588, the Spanish Armada, 1588, 1588, 1588. What's the year? 1588, 1588. What's the year? Yep, you better be saying it with me, 1588. The event's called the Spanish Armada. It is the largest fleet of ships created to that point to invade. There is an idea that they're going to go in and they're going to be able to be successful. He has a ginormous amount of ships. The problem is the weather wasn't helping him out. Here's another image. Despite the great odds against him, he alone believed God would bring him victory. This is the problem of being so heavily dogmatic. He felt he empowered. And in the end, when we see the battle, which is the lower one's a good painting of the battle. In the end, the English win. There's two reasons why the English win. Number one, the Protestant win. Elizabeth calls it the Protestant win, a quote unquote miracle from God that protected England. But in reality, it was a nor'easter. It was a storm that damaged a great number of Spanish ships, weakening their invasion, despite their original numbers, greatly weakened. And the second thing is the English had more efficient ships. The English merchants had worked to perfect the caravel, and they were able to defeat the Spanish galleons, which were awkward, slow ships. But in the end, the English win. If you wanted to throw a third thing, English nationalism, we'll probably talk about that tomorrow. But in the end, the Spanish Armada, 1588, saw Philip land his worst defeat. Spanish Armada, the English win. The Spanish are no longer the naval power of Europe. England is rising up because of the Tudor policies. And this is where we see the ramifications. I like the word ramifications. It means consequences or results. And what do we see? The Spanish economy continues to decline. There's like this through line from his great-grandparents, Ferdinand and Isabella, right through to him, because we know about the concept of the wool exports. We see the overextension of his power. He's doing too much. He's trying to be both political and religious. We know that the Spanish naval dominance is over. That's going to be important to the formation of the 13 colonies later when we talk about it. And then we have the Spanish Empire is beginning its long decline. So despite Philip II representing the pinnacle of Spanish power, the apex of Spanish power, his policies usher in the long-term decline. I hope that makes sense to y'all, and I hope you're all ready to rock and roll for that quiz. You guys have a great day, and I'm going to stop this.